looking for technical assistance. All right, here we go. So my name is Nicky Sheets. I work at Thomas Edison State College at the Watson Institute for Public Policy, and there we try to develop policy that will protect and help communities in New Jersey. And I'm also a member of the New Jersey Environmental Justice Alliance. The Alliance is getting ahead of myself, the Alliance is the only statewide group in New Jersey that focuses on environmental justice issues, and we're the only statewide environmental group in which the majority of both our membership and leadership are people of color. And I can't wait to show you this graph, this figure. And I apologize to those of you who have seen it already, who have seen my act before, but I am very excited because this is a new audience for me, and I have shown this figure all over the country, and it is why I work in the environmental justice field. So what is it? I'm glad you asked. It is two figures produced by the Department of Environmental Protection, and it shows the amount of cumulative impacts in every neighborhood in New Jersey. Now, by cumulative impacts, I mean basically how we deal with multiple pollutants emitted by multiple sources of pollution in a neighborhood. You can think of it as an estimate of the amount of pollution in every neighborhood in New Jersey. Very rough estimate, combines 9 indicators. 2009 data, my caveat to you would be that it might have changed since 2009, although we doubt it. So what is the graph showing us? Okay, we don't have a pointer, so I'm going to be the pointer. So what the figures show us is that look on the y-axis, and that tells you the amount of cumulative impacts. Now, look at the top figure. It says percent minority, percent of color. What happens as the number of people of color in the neighborhood increases? What happens to the amount of pollution? It increases, doesn't it? It's almost a straight line relationship, right? Now look at the bottom figure. That's the number of people, number of poor people living in the neighborhood. What happens is the number of poor people living in the neighborhood increases. Again, the amount of pollution increases. Again, it's almost a straight line relationship. So what this is telling us, and so this is what I say it every time, and I'll say it again. What this is telling us is that as of 2009 anyway, in New Jersey, the amount of pollution in your neighborhood is connected to the amount of money in your pocket and the color of your skin. And I think we would all say that that is unacceptable. Now, let me add today, let me ask you a question. How can this be 50 years after enforced racial discrimination is over? Let me ask you another way. How can we let it be? How can we let this happen now that we know about it? You know, I've said this a number of times all over the country, and every time I say it, I get angry. And I hope you start to get angry. Now, let the anger dissipate, and ask me another question. What does this have to do, with climate change? Well, I'm glad you asked that question. Here's what I want to argue to you. Here's what I'm going to become the point. These communities over here on the right-hand side, right? These are communities of color, and those are poor communities. Those are communities of color and poor communities. Those are what we call environmental justice communities. Not only do they have a high level of cumulative impacts, but what I want to argue to you is that they are also especially vulnerable to the detrimental impacts of climate change. So they're not the only vulnerable communities, but low-income communities and communities of color are especially vulnerable. They're the detrimental impacts of climate change I'm talking about. You can see them. Severe storms, flooding, displacement, heat waves, increased air pollution, higher food prices, and add to it possibly higher rates of infectious disease. Well, why are communities of color and low-income communities more vulnerable? Well, one reason is because they have a lot of pollution, because of cumulative impacts, right? And the pollution leads to what? Health problems. Health problems lead to health disparities. In our country, we have health disparities based on, not only based on, but partly based on race and income. So this makes you more vulnerable to increased air pollution, to heat waves, to infectious disease. Housing and lending discrimination. We're trying to come back from the storm. If you're a person of color and you face housing and lending discrimination, it's going to be tougher to come back from the storm. Institutional unconscious racism, racism of all kinds makes it tougher for communities of color. Poor communities have fewer resources, poorer infrastructure, and the urban heat island effect, because of all the impervious surfaces in urban areas, it's actually higher. So what do EJ communities need? And I'm saying, what do they need, especially from the planners and the policymakers in the audience? What do they need in the context of climate change? Well, first, we need to find out what happened in these communities. Where we talk a lot about coastal communities, we talk a lot about rebuilding boardwalks, and I'm down with that, that's cool. But we also need to find out what happened to communities of color and poor communities. And we need to find out what happened to these communities on the coast, and we also need to find out what happened to them in urban areas. I know we have a couple of people in here from Newark. Newark flooded. What happened to those communities there? We need a systematic study. Okay, we also need community-level adaptation plans for the environmental justice communities, since they are more vulnerable. And when I say community level, I do not mean municipal level. I mean neighborhood level. That's one thing we've always run into. We talk in the EJ community in terms of neighborhood, and usually when government hears community, they mean municipality. We want a small geographic unit for that. Equitable mitigation policy that improves public health, that's shorthand for saying the EJ community does not support carbon trading. Another story, ask me about that in the back of the room after I'm through talking. Address storm surge. This is another important issue, especially for EJ communities, and this ties into cumulative impacts. If you have more polluting facilities in your neighborhood, if there's storm surge, when the waters recede, you have increased risk of contamination. It's happened in Newark, happened in the unbound section in Newark. They had storm surge. Was there contamination left behind? Lastly, again, connected to cumulative impact. I even have a tough time saying that. Don't perpetuate, as we rebuild, let's not perpetuate that very disturbing relationship that I showed you between race, income, and pollution. So let's talk about that for a minute. How do we not perpetuate that? Well, we're saying, when I say we here, I mean the environmental justice community, we're saying ask these three questions when you're rebuilding a facility. First, does it emit a significant amount of pollution? Second, is the community you're rebuilding in, does it have a high level of cumulative impacts? Third, is it an EJ community? If the answer to all those questions are yes, then before you rebuild, you need to have a cumulative impacts policy in place, I'm talking to the planners now, in that community that will reduce pollution in that community before you add more pollution to it, or restore pollution to it, I guess I should say. Okay, let's wrap up here. What's the take-home message? What I call the kind of narrow take-home message is that I'm arguing to planners and policymakers that while we're rebuilding from Sandy, we can't perpetuate that unholy relationship between race, income, and pollution. And we also have to take special note and make special effort to develop strategies and policies that will protect low-income communities and communities of color. But there's a broader context. I talked to you about inequities that apply in the environmental field and with respect to climate change. But we all know that in society we have broader inequities, right? We have inequities around income, incarceration, around poverty. So the larger challenge is that we need to develop policies and strategies that as much as possible also address these larger inequities. So here's the challenge, here's the mission that I'm going to send you on. We have to develop policies and strategies to rebuild and to fight climate change. But at the same time, we have to create a more equitable and just society. We have an opportunity to make something good come out of something that was very bad. So let's not miss the opportunity. Thank you.